Welcome back. And thank you for joining us at the Dignity and Development Forum. This is a forum sponsored by the Keough School of Global Affairs, for those of you just joining us. And in addition to this great local audience, we have a super large virtual audience with 700 some odd people registered to participate. We have a social media presence, and so I have a hashtag for you, hashtag DignityDev. That is hashtag DignityDev, if you'd like to tweet about this or connect with your peers on social media. Our event for the next hour is a roundtable discussion on some of the themes that arose during last night's lecture by Dr. Ezekwesili, who's joining us on the panel, and during the remarks by Pendleton-Jullian, also joining us on the panel this afternoon. Joining us also, I'd like to welcome Ambassador Bisa Williams at my side. Ambassador Williams is currently a senior fellow at Yale's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs, the managing director of Williams Strategy Advisors, and she serves as the independent observer of implementation of the peace agreement in Mali. She's here collaborating with my colleagues in the Kroc Institute's Peace Accords Matrix, which holds primary responsibility for monitoring the implementation of the Colombian peace agreement. Before that, Bisa had a distinguished career in the Foreign Service for more than 30 years. She served as ambassador to Niger and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of African Affairs. She holds a master's degree in comparative literature and national security strategy. Bisa, welcome to Notre Dame. And I would like to welcome my Keough colleague and champion of student excellence and creativity, Steve Reifenberg, a teacher, a practitioner, and an author. Steve is currently the co-director with my other colleague, Tracy Kajewski-Correa, of the Keough School's Integration Lab, where our professional master's students come to learn the practice of scoping complex problems and designing frameworks to hunt for solutions. Previously, Steve served as the executive director of the Notre Dame's Keough Institute for International Studies and of Harvard's David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies. Thank you for joining us, Steve. So during this session, 45 minutes to an hour, I really want to construct a dialogue about some of the themes that arose and the experiences that these remarkable people have lived and experienced. I think I want to talk about what to do next in light of the themes that Obi and Anne raised in their talks, and to think about also leadership and student formation and schools of global affairs as a space to help kind of reorient ourselves to tackling problems and challenges in the ways they described. I really imagine a fluid conversation, not a short series of lectures in parallel, and so please feel free to interact with each other, and towards the end of the segment, we'll bring questioners up to the mic at the podium here to pose some questions. So I guess the way I want to start, I'll start with a question, and then we'll see where it goes from there. You know, these three women, and Steve, this man on stage as well, have been very successful of navigating the choppy waters, the messy mess that one encounters when promoting peace, development, and human flourishing. You know wicked problems, and you know how intractable they can become. So I wanted to ask you to get us started. Like, what is the source of your optimism? What gets you going? A mindset, a mental model, a framework for thinking that motivates you and inspires you and focuses your attention with each new challenge as you confront it. And I'd like to start with Bisa, if we can, and then work on to Steve and Anne and Obi.
Well, thank you. And first of all, let me thank all of you, and thank Notre Dame, actually, and the Keough School for inviting me. This is my first time here at Notre Dame, and I am thrilled to be here and so impressed with everything that I've seen. So thank you. I'm quite honored. What motivates me? To tell you the truth, I find my motivation, and certainly throughout my Foreign Service career, in the little things, in realizing that there but for the grace of God go I. And so I have always imagined myself in the other. Maybe that it's part of my experience as a minority in the United States, or an emerging majority person, I should say. But for example, when I was ambassador in Niger, one of the poorest countries on the planet, one of the hottest countries on the planet, literacy rate maybe 20%. And coming from the most powerful country at the time on the planet, I still was able, I went to every region, I went to the top little villages, and I saw that everybody there could actually be who I was if their circumstance were different. So part of that is empathy, and part of that is just understanding that we really are a human family. I don't have a big philosophical thing behind that or academic notion behind that, but it helped me as a leader help my other very privileged and really expert Foreign Service officers and team to see that we needed to be among people, that we had our own story to tell, but we had so much to learn from other people there. So my motivation has always been to understand the other and to see that the other is really me in a different form. I hope that doesn't sound too egotistical, because I don't mean it in that way, but it just means really trying to walk or trying to dance in the other person's shoes. I have a thing about dance, and I used to go to all the villages, and whenever we finished our important meeting with the elders, I would always go see the children, and I would always learn one of the traditional dances, because I was also a dancer as a younger person. But walking out in front of the television cameras, dancing with the community, because the whole community will accompany you, help break down barriers as well, and just show that we are all the same family, and if I could establish some kind of a common communication plane, then we can figure out how to work together. So that's my start.
Yes, that's beautiful. I recognize. I imagine that these other panelists would agree that if we're going to be rigorous about rethinking our approach to these things, like it can't be at odds with our intuitions. These intuitions to have human connections, to dance with or for the children, and I know, Steve, for example, recently you wrote an essay in Commonweal magazine memorializing your good friend, Paul Farmer, who recently passed. And you tell the story about a woman who was treated at one of his clinics and who, upon leaving after a long period of a long stay, came out and said she didn't know how to thank you, but the clinic and the workers at the clinic, but that all she had was her story, and that she'd tell it with abundance as her gratitude. So these, I think to create the space for these stories is essential, and we need to bring it into the processes we build. Steve, how about you? Frames, mindsets, ways of.
Well, thank you. First, I want to say how nice it is to be here, and actually, what a wonderful kind of sequence of presentations from Obi's presentation, I think, last night, that really challenged us to think about the complexity of these problems, also the failures of institutions, and you, as you described, the famine of leadership. And I've been thinking a lot about that, and but also saw when you were talking last night that within your talk were these real seeds of hope. kind of thinking about this life of service this vision that your family had given you, particularly your father, of mutual responsibility, of recognizing the inherent dignity in others. And then really just thinking about kind of where we're looking for insights from the kind of bottom up. And then to have Anne talk today about this kind of real opportunity for thinking about the complexities and how you enter in, and the need for a reframe. And also both of you talked about the importance of imagination, and so maybe connecting to what you were saying about Dr. Paul Farmer, who is one of the founders of this organization, Partners in Health globally, that he has a line that he says, our greatest failures are the failures of imagination. That this possibility to rethink things. And so I think about the story that you mentioned was actually a woman in Haiti that when they started out in the 1980s, these tiny little clinics in Haiti. And after actually Anne was mentioning 2010 as this pivotal year of so much that happened in the world. But one of the things that happened was there was an earthquake in Haiti. 360,000 people were killed. The majority of government buildings brought down. The national hospital was just crumbled. And the organization working with the government made a commitment to build the largest modern hospital ever in the country, a government hospital in partnership. And they called it the University Hospital Mirbelet. And people said, well, there's no university there. And Paul Farmer would say, well, not yet. And there is today a hospital all run by Haitians that is, again, in partnership with government. And that sense of imagination, that sense of the possibilities. And then maybe just the final comment would be pick up on what Bisa was saying about the connections, and you even used the word accompany others, but that connection to others. And I was thinking, as particularly Anne was talking, about these complex systems, and then sometimes people really sit in the analysis of the complex system in really smart ways. But then what's the motivation to move, to act, to do something? And I think it really goes to, and Pope Francis would say, about proximity, being near to one another. And this language then that for me comes out of Catholic social teaching and liberation theology and Pope Francis, but about accompaniment, about walking together in proximity with another as providing both the motivation and the inspiration for that. And maybe a final comment, I always think about Gustavo Gutierrez, who was one of the real founders of liberation theology, and we had a conference a little bit like this, and somebody stood up on the platform and said, well, my mission is to be the voice for the voiceless. And Father Gustavo said, that's not your mission. Yeah. Your mission is to give them the microphone.
Yeah.
Right.
Very good. What else?
So that very inspired by the vision and the way that you kind of engage others to give them the microphone.
If I can just pick up on that too, because another theme that I think both Anne and Obi talked about was the idea of solving you don't solve the problem. You find the answers by trying stuff first. You have to go to the problem, start something, try something, and then as you fail or as you go through this as you evolve, the answers will come. And that's sort of like also giving the mic to the voiceless. But this notion that you don't have to already know how your perfect structure is going to work. You have to start somewhere. You have to use your imagination and inspiration, and the answers will emerge as you go through your trial and error. I think that's so important, particularly like if you're coming from, if you're within an institution like the State Department, for example. The idea of failure can be quite intimidating, embarrassing. What we used to call that career damaging or something like that. I'm not in that anymore. Something like that. But it's essential in order for something new to happen. You have to start.
Interesting.
Anne or Obi, would you like to react to I hear proximity, twice in different forms, and of course that does resonate with our charisma here in the Keough School. I think we really try to root ourselves and orient ourselves towards proximity, towards accompaniment. What other mindsets, models? Your mind is filled with many models, I realize.
But no formula.
Is there a meta model?
No, I wanted to actually pick up, which is a great question, and I've got things rushing towards that answer, towards that thing, but I wanted to pick up on what you said about this trying stuff thing. However, trying stuff, getting feedback and knowing how to make it better is really, really important. The issue is that before one tries stuff that may be very harmful to a community, I think we have better means of seeing the problem better. Yeah. And so when I talk about ecologies of action, part of it is to not only see better first, but anticipate what may not work, what would you need to do to bolster it, and but you need to still start. Yeah. So I think we can do better before we start is what I'm trying to say. The seeing more, better, faster. Yeah. We can do better, and that's what gives me hope. And then help others see beyond what they can't see, which is also really important. And we have, whether it's not just new technologies, it's how do we construct larger visions than here's my solution to your problem vision, right? Here's what the world could look like if, and in some detail, and then, and by the way, to get there.
Yeah.
So I think we can
totally
do that,
agree.
and I know you do. I'm because you work in it, but then you do have to start. You can't be paralyzed.
That's the thing, and it's so easy to be. That's what I meant.
So we do have to start. Resonates so much with me. I was many things before I ended up in government. And one thing that was very clear to me was I didn't want to have anything to do with the ecosystem of politics. I saw it as, no way, my dad would freak out if he heard that I'd become a politician. I mean,
She's
like
lost.
politicians. No, so one of the requirements of becoming a minister by the time I was in cabinet initially reforming our public procurement system, but I wasn't a minister, but I was a cabinet member. It was that important a job. And then when I was going to go back to Kennedy School, my boss at that time said, let me watch you walk through the door. That was enough of a threat, so I had to shift my plans and stayed on and staying on to complete that reform agenda. As I was completing it, and he saw how excited I was to take off, he hits and says, I want you to solve another problem for me. And so that problem became my being made a minister, which is something I didn't want to be. So I became Minister of Minerals. And it required my becoming a leader of the party. Remember, I didn't go into government on the basis of politics. So this is just to build on all the things you were saying about the detours that we sometimes have to make. So I say to the politicians from my state, don't you dare come near me. I don't want to do anything that means being a leader of the party in my state. You go and do whatever you want to do. And you know what? Just know that I acknowledge your work. I'm a technocrat. I have no business with the politics. I was a fool. I was a big fool. But it took me years to remember, to realize how much of a fool I was. Because all that happened, Tom, was that, I'd done the procurement reform, done the extractive industries transparency work to bring the light into a murky, petroleum sector in my country, then become a minister of minerals and then minister of education, and still thinking nothing concerns me with politics. So I'm this policy person, and I'm excited to just say policy person, right? Like the world is not integrated into something higher, right? So I leave government with my colleagues who were equally reformers. And what do you think the politics does to all the work? It takes all the work and distorts it. Takes all the work and renders it not progressively growing on us as it should. So what do you think then happens? I see that governance is only possible through the politics. The quality of governance that countries will get is dependent on the quality of politics that countries are given. So we're all sitting and saying, you see, politics, it belongs to these dirty guys. Just leave them, let them do their thing. And then we turn around to say we want something really great from dirty guys.
Yeah.
Remember, I didn't say women. There are many of them running around the political parties. So, Tom, it took me time to now realize that every time I saw the quote by Plato, where he said, if you think that politics is beneath you, you will end up being ruled by your inferiors. I never really paid attention to that quote. But when I went full cycle, I realized that I'd missed it big time. So I decided that I'm going to go into the political space. And that's how I went into the political space. And my experience there told me, yes, now you understand why things don't add up. I had to take out time to go and do some research about it. And I will talk about it when we go to the next round. But I think that for me, sitting and listening to you, Anne, that whole complexity of how you brought the various models and built the interconnections, the way that you landed into a clarity of even though the clarity is not one that is arrogant and sort of saying, this is the way, follow it, right? But it does challenge us. It does say to us, we can afford to question every and anything and not allow any tyranny of any kind to hold us back from pushing the envelope that is possible. Because, look, Tom, we get comfortable. What do we need? We sort of say, the world is good. We're fine, thank you. No, we're not fine. We're not.
Well,
and our children aren't fine.
Yeah.
And our grandchildren to be born are not fine.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The intergenerational legacy issues. We look at the kind of dumping intergenerational dynasty of poverty around us.
Yes.
And then we, the global elite, we sit around at fancy places. At some point I said, I was chair of the World Economic Forum, Regional Strategy Board, and all of that. But there was a time after the global financial and economic crisis, I was just so upset. I didn't want to go again. Because some of the people that had done the things that went wrong with the global economy used to sit on the front row. Your eyes.
We noticed you weren't upset about that last night. we noticed it hadn't affected your thinking at all.
One of the things I struggle with, though, as I listen to these big ideas and the perspectives you both brought, and the lived experiences I know you all have, is to know, like, how do I avoid becoming the Obi who was the technocrat? Right now, I said a moment ago, we're all economists. And what I mean, of course, is that we're forming students here.
Yes.
I I'm no student. I'm a middle-aged, middle-ranked professor, and yet I feel trapped in my methodological and theoretical, lane. So what you both challenged us to do is to find a way to get beyond those disciplinary constraints, the incentives we face, the way organizations, the State Department, and the whole of the U.S. government is organized. So I guess my next kind of question is like, how do we move in that direction? Or what do we do next? I mean, Anne, you have quite a lot to say about that, I think. It's overwhelming, though. How do we... and I mean, anybody can interject here. I was thinking of Anne's. I know you bring rich perspective on that very particular question.
Yes.
And in fact, you challenge us to not. You basically said muddling through, no excuses.
No.
Yeah.
There are tools and creativity and innovation happening now, and get on board. Keough School, get on board. All of us, Rand, Georgetown.
Yes.
The new school you've founded. What's our next move? Steve?
Well, maybe just I've been thinking a lot about when you think about these incredibly complex, wicked problems. How do you enter in? And I think that there's a challenge with entering in at one space which says, "Oh, I'm the expert. I know how to solve that problem, and I can take control and I can make that all work." I think there's another challenge sometimes that happens, and there's kind of this encouragement to be really, really humble and be really just sit and listen and and there's this kind of tension, and I think the really interesting place is to think about how do we be either humbly confident or confidently humble, right? So it acknowledges the skills that somebody brings from an experience. And then also acknowledges that the communities that you're working with, there's nobody in the world with more expertise than those communities themselves. And so how do you find a process to walk together that really thinks about uniting synergistically the comparative expertise from something else with the lived experience, and then create with imagination something that didn't exist before, which is what I hear all of you actually referencing.
So I think the problem is how you define, or whether you even use the word expertise, because there's also the tyranny of the expertise, right? I told the story about the sociologist who in front of the class said he wasn't going to discuss an issue with me because I didn't have a PhD in his field, and my friends were totally outraged at that. But I think but there is another side of it. When you do go to work with a community, they're an expert in some stuff, which is their lives, but they're still turning to you because there are things that there are other skills they don't have, right? So I think it's really, and I've worked with several people I've been in talks where the economist is not maligned, but the architect is maligned because they're only all about form, and as a planner in this case, it was going in and listening to the community, specifically with the whole Florida debacle, and listening and saying, well, where did they want to live? And they came back, and I'm here to facilitate, right? And that's my expertise. And they came back with, they wanted to live where they'd been destroyed before, and how did they want to live in the same houses they had before? So there's a responsibility.
Right.
But I think for me, it's really, do we bring expertise? That's important. But instead, do we bring a practice, this practice that I'm talking about, to help people find what they can't see, the unintended opportunities, to bring them through that process. I was going to say something more profound, but I forgot what it was.
Well,
That's very helpful.
While you're thinking of that, can I just piggyback on the idea? Through the Carter Center, I am working as the lead of the Carter Center's team for the implementation of the peace agreement in Mali. And the peace agreement was signed in 2015. For the last several years, there has been this international committee, mostly Malians, but then the supporters of the agreement, who meet maybe once a month, maybe every 3 months, to talk about where they are in implementation. And for 3 years solid, all the men got together. The same people who had negotiated the peace were the people who were around this table saying, okay, here's how we're going to implement this accord. And so they continued in this sort of negotiating sort of mentality because they were still negotiating with each other. And all this time, regardless of the fact there were representatives from the Security Council there were representatives from the neighboring states, all the men were there. And so the independent observer kept saying, where are the women? I mean, aren't you all representing communities? Where are the women? Where are the women? So, okay, it took 3.5 years, but they put some women in the room. It's not enough to put some women in the room. Do they know much about the peace agreement? Do they understand what it means to try to implement it? Has anybody taught them in their own culture and in their own, this combination of UN-style speak and implementation mixed with local? Malian, here are our expectations, here's how we communicate with each other, and can a woman really contradict what a man is saying who's not from her community, not from her ethnic group, not from even her part of the country? How do you do that? How do you, so it's not enough for the outsider, our well-meaning, well-intentioned and right-visioned in certain ways, independent observer to say, you've got to diversify this group.
Yes.
But you got to equip. You got to figure out what else is missing, and do the people there see what else is missing? Well, of course, all the men in the room, they knew exactly what we were doing, and they resisted fiercely. That's why it took 3 years to get the women there. But it has been a learning process for all of them to figure out, okay, how do we listen? How do we now listen to these women and figure out whether and how we're going to incorporate what they have to say? So maybe now you've recalled what you wanted to say, but but anyway, it's an example of.
So I went from that state of there's something about politics that's creating the problem, and we've been ignoring, to a place of research and said, something is wrong with politics. So I'm going to do a research, and I'm going to call it Fix Politics, right?
Right.
So
#Fix Politics.
Yes,
That's right.
and so so I the Germans Robert Bosch Academy says come spend time with us, and so I use that moment in Berlin to do this, and then I construct based on the fact you weren't dissing economics, so I was very happy you weren't. Because, so I said, our politics has become transactional. If it's become transactional, it means that there's something about economics that, that can unlock a better understanding of what's going on. So I then decided to use the economic model of markets as a basis to look at politics. And on the basis of that, I construct something that I call the triangular pillars of democracy. So one pillar is the pillar of the demand side. The other pillar is the pillar of the supply side. And the apex pillar is the pillar of the regulatory system. And that if you looked at the interaction between the electorate and the politicians, and then the institutions that regulate our political process, it can teach us some of the things that we have not paid sufficient attention to. So I used that as a basis, and it actually gives me some findings. And suddenly I'm like, oh dear Lord, we could just be waiting for our governance to deliver something different until the year 2100, until the year 2200, and we would only find incremental changes, especially in the developing society. We have a broken political system, and the culture that now has formed out of that system is a culture that inherently subordinates the public good for the narrow and private interest of a very slimmer size of a population of the people. And so suddenly I'm thinking, oh my God, okay, so what does this model say about how to correct this distortion? So I start from that inquiry, and I begin to see the things that we need to do on the demand side, on the supply side, on the regulatory side. So one of the things was to start the School of Politics, Policy, and Governance. So basically, this market of monopoly, because my study ended up with monopoly democracy. So we have monopoly democracies, which is an anomaly. There shouldn't be anything monopoly about democracy. Yeah. You know, so it then takes me to the place where I sort of say to the findings, we're going to act on you. We're not going to just put this knowledge out. We will act on you. So we start the School of Politics, Policy, and Governance because I look at all the politicians in my country. It's an Africa-wide study, by the way, and in Kenya and all the other places, and I sort of say, guys, you've done enough damage. It's now time to build a new political class. And we're going to build this new political class with three things in mind. The three things that you lack: competence, capacity, and character. Yeah. That's what we want to produce in this new model, right?
At your new school.
And knowledge of complex systems. You have a fourth thing. It also starts with the C.
Right. You know what? You just got it. You know? So we take these as a basis, and then we look at, and that's where, you know, the whole thing about the analytical underpinnings of problems that we want to solve. It's okay to get with the hunches. It's okay to think of the intuition. But the fact is, we need a mix of these tools. Yes. And so that analytical process gives us the curriculum of what the politician after my heart would look like. What do I want them to look like? I want to design them through my curriculum, right? And that's what we did. They designed the curriculum that we have, training these new leaders, is one that I have seen the first set of graduates. We graduated 160 after, their 8 months of continuous program around all the disciplines. So when you talk about the integral thing, we're doing it through the school. So we've graduated 160, another 170 will graduate in the next coming months. The third class are already starting the admission process. And so we're just taking at it. We'll get to a threshold, and it scales, right?
I think that congratulations, yes.
That's great.
I think that all of us here, and it's a conversation that will happen beyond, but are invested deeply in education and in innovating in education. And that's an exciting part of a conversation that we should all have together in the coming day, but also beyond. At this point, I wanted to bring in...
Can I pick up on what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
And then we'll take some questions from the audience.
I'll try to keep it really
Yeah.
short. So what's phenomenal about starting a new school is you can do exactly that. I've been working with the Pardee Graduate School of Public Policy to take their legacy and move it. And the very first thing, and we did world building to really get beyond the tyranny of what they understood. But as what we did is two critical things, is we turned the whole idea inside out. Instead of you learn core stuff and spend 2 years in microeconomics, right? But it was a joke. It's a joke. You do core learning, and then you apply it, and then you do your PhD. Yes. We turned it inside out. We said, what if everything is about problem-based? What if we create a new thing called the Public Policy and Action Studio? Yes. And we work on intractable problems in that. Of course, there are a series of what we call starter content to get them started, but then everything else is pull-based. And so to support that, we transform the curriculum into what I call now the content ecology. Yes. So instead of a course of 10 weeks, another course of 10 weeks, another, is what do you need to learn to be good at microeconomics? What do you, and how long will it take, and what's the best means to get it? And in some cases, it's a study group of 5 people learning together something more efficiently than Sage on stage. So this idea of the public policy, they've rewired their brains such that now they're seeing all of their issues as entangled. And this is where a lot of these tools have come from, and how this practice has been building through that. And it's been very disruptive. And so the actual Rand researchers at the intersect with like, what is this stuff, right? But it's rewired their brains. And
so 1 minute, Tom. There's a little element of this. We call it our Capstone Project. It really brings our students taking a particular tough issue in Nigeria and then collaborating to deliver on it. And it's amazing. One of our graduates was recently celebrated for the community where he did what is equivalent to the Peace Corps, youth service. He saw that there was a bridge that was gone. And so the economic dependency of that community deepened, because now people who could cross and intersect with trade and market could not. He decided to do something about it as part of their Capstone Project. And it worked. So even if I'm not directly solving problems anymore, what I've done through the school is to build an ecosystem of people coming together and working together to solve these.
We call them problem ecologists. I'm trying to build problem ecologists.
Well, maybe I could just add, just because we have a number of the master students in global affairs here from the Keough School of Global Affairs, and when you were talking earlier, you talked about your work of this idea of two-stage, of you make progress by doing the work and then you reflect on it. And I think a lot of that would describe a lot of the work framed around some of these major themes of integral human development. I co-direct something called the Integration Laboratory with an engineer, and which tries to bring together people from different disciplines to look at this complex ecosystem of the problems and to think about how do we make progress by actually doing the work in partnership with organizations. And so rather than give a long explanation for that, I hope that some of you will engage with these master students to talk about their own experiences at different organizations globally that they're working with.
And let's start that right now and ask if there are any students or anybody else who would like to stand up and pose a question for the panel. Thank you, Nicoletta.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicoletta, and I'm from Moldova. It's been so enlightening and transformative to really be part of these conversations, and I'm very grateful to be here and for the organizers. So I come from a place of the world that is struggling with currently a war, corruption, endemic poverty, nepotism, and many other structural challenges. And as a young person, I'm wondering about returning to the workforce, right? Embarking on these jobs in organizations and governments that in one way or another are built on or promote directly or indirectly these complex systems and problems that we're referring to. So my question is, how can we as young people make everything that we've talked about really applicable to our future workforce? How can we really take that microphone or bring that folding chair to a conversation and table where we are not invited at because we are young or inexperienced? Just 3% of the US government employees are young people, people that are younger than 30 years old. What about the rest of the world? Thank you.
So
That's a sobering question.
we're working off of decades of experiences up here. And that may tend to imply that it's hard and it's big and you have to do it all at once, right? It was wonderful to hear your story of how you got involved in politics. I think it's making sure you have an entrepreneurial spirit and looking for opportunities where they don't seem to exist, right? So part of what we're talking about is really at the big scale, just because again, it's coming from decades of experience and where one's risen to. I love using the term unintended opportunities. We keep talking about unintended consequences. How can you look for corners of the problem by seeing more, better, faster of the problem? That's the first step. Pick up the tools, go to Scotty Page's multiple modeling course, but begin to pick up the tools, begin to read the books that talk about this stuff, and use that to find the corners of the problem where no one's paying any attention.
Yes.
And it's an activism that's subversive in a sense. And I mean, that's how I started. It was like, get her out of the room for years and decades. And when you begin to build momentum around a success, then people can't ignore you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. They mustn't ignore you.
But you can't build success when you're up against all that, when you're this humility. You have to develop humility, because if you're out there screaming, I'm going to change the world, it's all the antibodies come out, and especially if you're young, it's
yeah.
So you find the corners, and you work, and you make sure they're matched to what's authentic to you. Not just you should care, but because you do care.
Yes.
It's authentic to who you are as a person. If you're good at music, you do it's in the music. If you're good at something, it doesn't have to be in policy. In fact, usually, I hate to say it, policy can be hollow sometimes as a way to approach a problem.
I thought of this entrepreneurial spirit. The reason I leaned hard on your 2 master's degrees in comparative literature and national security strategy, did I get that right? Is because that reflects, I think, the entrepreneurial spirit that you did that early in your, before your career.
Well, it also reflects just life opportunities. Things that you don't anticipate, one thing leading to another. I always thought I was going to teach literature, and I ended up entering the Foreign Service, and then next thing I knew, I'm getting a master's in national security studies. But one of the things I heard in question, and maybe I didn't hear it exactly right, was also, how do you do this and work too? Like, how do I get my job to do these things? And they may not happen concurrently. In other words, you might have to do the research and do the study while you are, working at Starbucks or doing a TA ship or doing an internship, doing something else. But you are still trying to find your community of like-minded, and you're still trying to equip yourself with what you feel like you need. So I didn't walk into the Foreign Service and say, okay, I'm going to be an ambassador. I saw an ad for the Foreign Service in a business magazine, to tell you the truth. When I was a girl, you could enter into a career and you work your way up the ladder and then you enlighten yourself. But things don't necessarily happen that way now. So I just wanted to say it may not be that you're going to be able to immediately find that element and start at that job and grow from that job. But it doesn't mean you can't be. I always use the example of this young people in Florida after the Parkland shooting, and how those teenagers created a national movement and actually changed laws in Florida, which is not an easy thing to do, but you can do parallel.
I want to use my practical example to support what Anne and our dear sister Bisa has been saying. It was about maybe a little number of years older than who you are right now. I was already known for putting out my perspective on a military government that practiced nothing but corruption, right? So it was tough to do that. In fact, it was considered suicidal to have an opinion against corruption under the military government. But I persisted in doing that. Father, who is sitting right in this, knows a friend of mine, Father Keough, or Hassan Keough in our country, who, when he would read me in the newspapers, he said, who's this girl? Who's this very, very bold? So he started writing to Guardian himself. He began to write because I was writing on the, op-ed and stating my point of view. Now, where did that lead to? Ultimately, it led to my becoming a co-founder of the global body you know today, as Transparency International. Started with that. Start.
Yeah.
Just get started.
Thank you. Angie.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for being here. It's been an honor for us to learn from your experiences. My name is Angelina Soriano. I'm from Mexico. I'm a Master in Global Affairs student. And in this, on grounds of imagination, imagining what's possible and to really transform our world, I would like to hear your reflections on how we can have educational spaces in which not only practical skills and integrative skills are learned, but also what we are so much in need, as you were saying yesterday, in this crisis of leadership in which we are, about ethics and learning how to address these very tough and challenges that require moral discernment, ethical dilemmas, and how to confront them in the very reality, which is not simple, and how to learn from leaders who have already addressed this. And also what we are so much in need, compassion, and many other things that require not only the technical part, but also the moral and the spiritual part. And I feel like there are no more, a lot of spaces, academic spaces, in which we can integrate all these things. And I'm very grateful because here in the Keough School, and I came to this school because of the integral human development perspective that I've been finding, not only in one class that we had, but also across the curriculum, because we need to see it in practice. So I would like to hear your reflections in how in other top schools as this one, we can also integrate this. And my second question would be also, sorry, I have a mic. No, how can we also integrate those voices that are not included in the table frequently because they don't have the technical expertise and because they are marginalized, and how can we also be mindful on integrating those voices into the table, and how we as practitioners can be mindful of this all the time, as Steve was saying, passing the mic to others. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. We have a few more minutes to respond to Angie's question, and then we'll be heading to lunch.
But we have another question.
Oh, and Father
yeah,
Paulinus,
yeah,
why don't you pose your question as well? And then we'll take both.
I know, he was already standing there.
My name is Paulinus Sodozo. I teach in Theology and African Studies departments here. Obi, I just wanted to ask you a direct question. You talked about you are discovering politics as an important thing if you want to make changes. And now you are training people in your new school. Are you training them for political parties? What is the end result when you graduate them? Where do you send them? What do you expect they do? And how, in the complex situation that is Nigeria, with all the political
shenanigans,
chaos that is, what difference do your students do you hope that they will eventually make?
Thank you, Father Paulinus. Okay, we have two questions, three on the table. Two from Angie.
If I can
Bisa,
start.
please.
It's interesting. I love teaching at Jackson. I've only been doing it for 1 year at Yale, but I'm there as a practitioner. I'm not part of the I love academia and all that. But so I find your question, Angie, interesting, and the way that I'm able to try to communicate empathy, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, is actually doing something that also Anne talked about towards the end of her statement. I teach a course on what I call turning points in peace building. Like, what are the unexpected things that can develop, and how do you work around them? But I start my course with a film. It might be the easy way out, but I have the students look at Timbuktu. It came out around 2015. And I ask them, okay, well, what does this tell you? What are your responses to this really beautiful movie that was inspired by 2 real events and then is a fictional film? And it's interesting because the students say, well, my goodness, they were speaking French, but I could hardly understand the accent. And then there were so many other languages going on. And I never thought about this. And look at the terrain. It's like, yeah, I want them to see all those kinds of things. But some of them, I wasn't even, they brought up issues that I wasn't even familiar with. But the point I'm making about that is I feel like in order to try to get these future practitioners, everybody at Jackson wants to go into some area of foreign affairs practice, to let them understand you need more than the desire to help other people and this wonderful goodwill. You need to see all of the things that are influencing an individual and a community. And we were talking about the Sahel in my class, and so this was a perfect way to say, okay, you have the jihadis, you have lifestyles between the fishermen and the nomads, and you have gender, you have everything in a nutshell, and you have this climate, this environment that they're all trying to navigate. So as a teacher, the best I can do is to constantly remind my students that the world is bigger than that which they've seen, that people are having their whole life experience and their whole humanity in different kinds of environments. And if you want to dare to try to make a contribution to humanity, it is your obligation also to see these various perspectives and to see that whole complex ecology, for example.
When humanity enters into the classroom, then you can't but
that's what I mean.
think of. Yeah. No, I'm just.
Yes.
Right.
Well put. What do the students go on? My husband and I were recently at an event. A young man comes to me and says, I'm your product. I was too tired. My brain wasn't alert. So I was thinking, he's my product. What does he?
Uh-oh.
So I said,
I don't remember you, Keough.
so I said, okay, yeah. So he saw my confusion. So he said, I'm a product of SPPG. That's the School of Politics, Policy, and Governance. And I said, oh, that's amazing. And he said, I have become the counselor in my community. After my graduation, I contested and I won. And he said, what I was taught at the SPPG helped me to win my election. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, we've only just graduated you. A few months ago, you already tested it. Father, we're training these ones to be an ecosystem of networked people that will embody the freedom of thought on politics that is different from what we have had so far. There are at least 15 of our graduates from the class that graduated that are going to run in the 2023 elections.
Wow.
General elections.
It's a mix of men and women running to be lawmakers, some running for executive office. You know what? We're just going to keep working, and one day you'll see us flying. That's what it's about, Father. We can't sort of say the system is too intimidating, therefore we can't even try. I've had people who said to me, it's too complex. And I've actually been told, don't you get tired? Like, are you a sufferhead or what? Sit down somewhere and ignore Nigeria. But I won't. I refuse to. And there's that part of that stubbornness in your presentation, where you simply said, how can he recommend a modeling through? No. No, we don't want a modeling through.
This is the panel of the stubborn.
Yeah, we have to. If it's a wicked problem, we're stubborn.
Right.
Yeah.
We have to break for lunch at this time, and I want to thank my panelists, our panelists, for coming. Bisa, it's a joy to meet you.
It's a great audience. Can we clap the audience?
Yes.
Nice.
So, and this conversation foreshadows what's coming at 2 o'clock back here, rewiring, in a sense, U.S. peace policy is the name of the panel. And so I hope you'll be able to join us there. But now we have lunch, and it's going to be, if you look out these windows over here to my left, there's a Jumbotron up there on a building. That's called Foley's? No. Crowley Hall of Music, pardon. And then up there on the 4th floor is the Foley's dining room, and that's where we'll be having lunch. So we have to walk out down this hall, outside onto the open air, and around to that building behind the Jumbotron. We'll see you there as soon as you can get there. It's a buffet lunch. I hope you enjoy.